The morning sunlight spilled across the quiet fields outside Asheville, North Carolina, painting the sky in soft gold and green valleys stretching beyond the old wooden fences. The school bus rumbled slowly along the narrow road, passing rows of maple trees whose leaves danced gently in the breeze. Inside that bus sat a quiet 14-year-old boy named Ethan Miller, with his backpack resting on his lap, one so worn that the seams along the edges had begun to loosen. He always chose the farthest seat, behind everyone else, not because he disliked people, but because silence felt safer than questions he could not answer. The world outside his window looked beautiful, rolling hills, neat gardens, and white barns catching the morning light, but Ethan's heart carried a quiet heaviness no one else could see. His shoes were a little too small, his jacket a little too thin, and his lunchbox was empty again, just like yesterday. He never told anyone. Hunger had become something he learned to ignore the way other children ignore the ticking of a clock. At Maple Creek Middle School, laughter filled the hallways as students greeted each other, but Ethan walked with his head slightly down, slipping into the classroom just before the bell rang. Their homeroom teacher, Ms. Grace Collins, noticed him like she always did. The softness in her eyes made her seem like she understood more than she ever said aloud. She was known in the school not only for her teaching but for a calm, gentle way of looking at people, as if she saw the storms they tried to hide. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, warmly. "Good morning, ma'am." His voice was low, polite, practiced. Ms. Collins didn't press further. She had learned long ago that some hurts only reveal themselves slowly, like the sunrise pushing away night. During break time, the cafeteria buzzed with chatter and movement. A group of boys rushed past him with trays full of sandwiches and fruit cups. Ethan walked instead to an empty bench near the window, pretending he wasn't hungry. He took out a tattered notebook and began writing math equations instead, his way of distracting his stomach from the ache. From across the room, Ms. Collins saw him again. She noticed how he never stood in line for lunch, never opened anything from his backpack during meals. Her mind held questions she wasn't ready to ask. Not yet, but her heart had already begun to fold itself around his silent struggle. After school ended, Ethan didn't take the regular sidewalk home like everyone else. Instead, he walked the long way through Willow Park, where tall oak trees cast shade along the path and ducks glided calmly across the pond. The place was beautiful, children playing, families laughing, yet Ethan walked past them like a traveler moving through a world that didn't belong to him. He passed the bus stop, but didn't board. Today he didn't have fare. He was used to walking. Every afternoon, no matter the distance. When the wind picked up, he pulled his thin jacket tighter around him, but the cold still slipped in. He tried to remind himself that someday things would change, that someday he'd succeed and his mother wouldn't have to work late nights at the old roadside diner just to keep lights on. Hope was his lantern, but lanterns flicker when they run out of oil. And lately, his was dimming. What Ethan didn't know was that someone had already begun watching over him, not in pity, but in quiet, hidden compassion. And soon, the truth of that kindness would unfold in a way that would change his life forever. The next morning brought a thin layer of fog across the countryside, wrapping the town in a white hush before the sun rose fully. The school bus rolled along its familiar route, tires splashing through small puddles left by the night's drizzle. Ethan watched through the glass as raindrops blurred the color of the trees, stretching the world into long strokes of green and gray. His stomach tightened again, not from nerves, but from absence, the quiet ache of another skipped breakfast. By second period, his head felt light. Hunger had a way of draining a person slowly, like a candle burning from the inside. He tried to stay focused, but his handwriting wavered slightly on the page. Ms. Collins noticed it, the faint trembling in his hand, the way he swallowed as if trying to push down emptiness. After class, she asked softly, "Ethan, would you mind helping me arrange some books in the resource room before lunch?" He nodded politely. Helping teachers meant staying busy. Staying busy meant ignoring hunger. Inside the room, she moved a small basket onto the table. "I always keep a few snacks here for students who forget their lunch or are having a rough day," she said casually, not looking at him directly as she opened the lid. Inside were granola bars, fruit pouches, crackers, nothing expensive, but everything comforting. "If you're hungry, feel free to take one," she added. He froze. For a moment, he wondered if she knew. But her voice was gentle, simple, no pressure, like a door that was half open instead of locked. Ethan reached in slowly, pretending it was for convenience rather than need. He ate it quietly while sorting books, and though he said nothing, his body loosened a little, as if his heart had taken its first warm breath in days. Ms. Collins said nothing more, but inside, she had made a silent decision: he will not walk this alone anymore. That afternoon, she visited the local farmer's market before heading home. She bought extra fruit, small sandwiches, and packed them into plain, unmarked paper bags. On the label, she wrote nothing, no name, no message. Only folded corners. The next morning, she placed one inside the resource room basket before students arrived. When lunch came, she watched discreetly from a distance as Ethan slipped back into the room. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, then took the bag. He didn't realize it had been prepared for him. He believed it had simply been available, like the sky, like shade from a tree, like a kindness that didn't expect gratitude in return. Days passed, and she continued, never once letting him know she was the one behind it. Some afternoons she slipped extra gloves or warm socks into the bin near the coats, pretending they were part of the school's lost and found closet. Ethan found a pair on a particularly cold Friday morning. He looked around as if searching for the unseen giver, then tucked the gloves into his jacket pocket with a quiet, grateful sigh. Meanwhile, his walk home had not grown shorter. The school bus fare wasn't a luxury his family could afford every day. He crossed through Riverbend Crossing, a long stretch of road lined with tall trees and occasional traffic from heavy logging trucks. The roar of engines shook the ground sometimes, and the cold February wind sliced through backcountry air. But he kept walking, step after step, carrying his tiredness like another backpack. Ms. Collins drove home the same route sometimes, far behind in her small gray sedan. More than once, she saw his silhouette on the shoulder of the road, head down, walking alone as evening shadows stretched across the fields. She would grip the steering wheel tighter, not out of worry only, but something sharper, something like heartbreak. Teachers could not fix everything, but they could still choose to be someone's warm light in the cold. And that choice had already been made. She just needed to wait for the right moment. The moment when small kindness would no longer be enough. And compassion would have to step forward unhidden. Because kindness is gentle, but love is brave, and soon, life would put both to the test. Winter in Asheville always carried a quiet kind of loneliness. The trees stood bare, branches stretching like thin fingers against a pale sky, and the sharp wind seemed to whisper through every doorway and corner of the small countryside town. For most students, winter meant hot chocolate, thick scarves, and long bus rides spent laughing with friends. But for Ethan, winter meant a battle, one he didn't talk about, one he didn't want pity for. His shoes were now torn at the toe, and the cold slipped in easily. His thin jacket had lost its zipper weeks ago. Still, he walked each morning before sunrise, crossing Willow Park when frost still shimmered along the grass like broken glass. Sometimes he arrived at school with fingers stiff and red from cold. But he never complained. That quiet strength, pain stitched behind silence, was what made Ms. Collins watch him more closely. One bitter morning, the sky hung low with heavy clouds, the bus was unusually late, and students shivered while waiting at the curb. Ethan stood slightly apart from the others, arms crossed tight over his chest, pretending the cold didn't bite him. Ms. Collins happened to arrive early that morning, parking her car just across the staff lot. For a long moment she simply observed him through her windshield, the thin layers, the shaking shoulders, the way he rubbed his hands against his sleeves like friction alone could create warmth. Her chest tightened. She stepped out of the car and called gently, "Ethan, could you help me carry a few boxes from the office before class?" He turned, instinctively hiding how cold he was. She didn't mention it. She simply led him inside, where warm air wrapped around them like an invisible blanket. On the desk sat a clean, folded winter coat. Gray, simple, but thick and new. She placed a hand on it casually. "Someone donated a few coats to the school," she said, voice calm, steady, believable. "If one fits you, you're welcome to take it. That's what they're here for." His throat tightened before he could speak. He touched the coat slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Yes," she said softly. "Quite sure." He didn't know the donor was her. He didn't know she had bought it late last night with her own money. He didn't know she had stood in the store aisle longer than most people take to choose furniture, checking sizes, thickness, imagining how it might feel for him to finally be warm. The next day, she watched him walk to class wearing the coat. The way he held his shoulders differently, no longer curled in defense, was a victory only she fully understood. But life seldom allows gentle momentum without testing it. That same week, a storm rolled into town. Snow fell heavy, roads iced over, and traffic turned into long lines of stalled cars and lumber trucks idling along Riverbend Crossing. The school closed early, but bus service was delayed. Students swarmed the lot complaining, but Ethan didn't wait. He simply began walking, knowing he would be traveling miles through snow on foot. Ms. Collins didn't see him at first, but when she finally left the building and spotted his small silhouette heading toward the highway, her breath caught. The sky was turning colorless, wind cutting sideways through the air. Cars slid, tires spun, plumes of exhaust fogged the street. It wasn't safe, not with heavy vehicles barreling down icy lanes. She hurried to her car and drove slowly behind him, watching as he pulled his coat closer and kept going, determined and alone. At a bend in the road, a semi-truck hit a patch of frozen slush and lurched sideways. Its horn thundered through the valley, deep, violent, terrifying. Snow sprayed upward like shattered glass. Ethan froze, heart hammering in his chest. Ms. Collins gasped. This was the moment everything could change. She pulled over quickly, flung open her door, and ran through the snow toward him. "Ethan," she shouted, fear breaking through her usually calm voice. He turned, startled, not by her voice, but by the sudden feeling that someone cared enough to run toward him instead of past him. No one had ever done that before. And this was the moment. Her quiet kindness began to step out of the shadows. The truth wasn't revealed yet, but the heart behind it had begun to speak. Snow crunched beneath Ms. Collins' shoes as she hurried toward Ethan, the wind slicing across her face. The truck regained control just in time, but the blast of air and shock had left the boy standing frozen in the road, his breath trembling in the cold. She reached him and placed her hands gently on his shoulders. "Ethan, you can't walk in this storm. It isn't safe," she said softly, still trying to steady her voice. He blinked, startled, not just by the danger, but by the unfamiliar feeling of someone running toward him, someone worried for him, someone who saw him. For most of his life, he had survived quietly, believing help was a door never meant to open for people like him. She led him to her car, turned up the heater, and waited for his hands to stop shaking. Silence filled the space, but it wasn't heavy, not this time. It was the kind of silence that held care, like a blanket wrapped around a weary soul. After a long pause, he whispered, I didn't mean for anyone to worry." She looked at him with the same gentle steadiness she had carried since the beginning. "Sometimes worry is love in disguise," she said softly. "And sometimes, the strongest people are the ones others overlook because they never ask for anything." His eyes lowered, voice unsteady. "I didn't want to be a problem." Her heart tightened. "You are not a problem, Ethan. You're a human being, and human beings deserve warmth and dignity." The car rolled slowly through the icy roads as she drove him home. The town lights glowed dimly through the storm, heavy trucks and buses rumbling by, snow spiraling into the headlamps like silver dust. The long route gave them time Ethan didn't know he needed. Just before reaching his street, the words slipped out of him, small and fragile. "Thank you, for the coat. And, for the food. I never said it, but, I knew it had to be someone." Her breath caught. Not because he knew, but because he had carried that gratitude alone, the way he carried everything else. She turned slightly toward him. "It was never charity," she said softly. "It was care. You should never have to feel ashamed of kindness." She hesitated before continuing. "I lost a student once, years ago, because I waited too long to show I cared. I promised myself I would never wait again." Something in his chest loosened. The loneliness that had lived inside him for so long, quiet, invisible, unspoken, softened like snow melting under sunlight. That week, she met with the principal and arranged discreet support, bus fare permanently covered, meal plan secured, supplies provided without paperwork or questions. Not as pity, not as spotlight, as dignity. The next months changed him. He sat closer in class. He raised his hand more often. He laughed. Not loudly, not often, but genuinely, like something inside him was beginning to heal. One spring afternoon, when cherry blossoms brightened the park and the air smelled of new beginnings, Ethan stayed after class and stood beside Ms. Collins' desk. "You didn't just help me," he said quietly. "You reminded me that I matter." Her eyes warmed. "You always mattered," she replied. "You just needed to see it for yourself." Years later, he would look back on this moment as the turning point, the day when kindness stepped out of secrecy and became a bridge between two lives, one giving, one receiving, both changed. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of love are the ones the world never sees. Until the moment they save someone's hope. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what part moved you the most, and don't forget to like and share this video with your friends so kindness can travel farther than we ever imagine. And if you're new here, please subscribe to our channel, Kindness Quest, where we spread real stories of compassion, hope, and humanity.